This is the second story from 145th Street by Walter Dean Myers. Our second story is titled The Baddest Dog in Harlem, and we begin on page 15. So please track the story. Page 15, The Baddest Dog in Harlem. We were all sitting around on the rail outside of Big Joe's place, trying to figure out which was the best fighter of all time. We'd had this conversation before, but what got everybody mad this time was Willie Murphy. Willie was in his 30s, or maybe even older, and was the kind of guy who thought that just because he was old, it meant he knew more than anybody. You have to go with Joe Louis being the best fighter of all time, Willie said. Joe held the championship for longer than anybody. That's because he didn't have to face Ali, Tommy said. Well, how about Roberto Duran? Pedro was sitting on a folding chair that was chained to the gate that covered Big Joe's place. Duran's not a heavyweight, Willie said. If you talk about the greatest fighter of all time, you have to talk about heavyweights. Well, why? That's what I said. Because you do, Willie answered. Now, that was a lame answer, and everybody there, with the exception of Willie, knew it. The conversation was getting to be stupid, and I knew it was going to get worse, because Mr. Lynch was coming down the street. Mr. Lynch was so old he had washed dishes at the Last Supper. Whatever you said, he would bring up something from 1,000 years ago that nobody ever heard about. What are you young people talking about? Mr. Lynch motioned for Pedro to get off his chair. These know-nothing kids thinking Ali could have taken Joe Louis. Willie started flapping his lips again. Ali couldn't have taken Joe Louis if Joe was fighting with a paper bag over his head. Ain't none of them could beat Jack Johnson, Mr. Lynch said, packing his old butt on the chair. Jack Johnson was the champion of the world, and he fought all over the world. Ali would have eaten him up, Willie went on. Now that's just one thing I know. Please pause and answer questions 1 and 2. Just when I was heating up enough to go up inside Willie's head, we heard squealing on the corner, and we looked up and saw 2 police cars coming tearing around the corner. They pulled up right in front of us, and the cops came out with their guns out. Now, I wasn't a fool, and I knew that when the police come tearing like that, they're looking for somebody. I did just like everybody else leaning on the rail did, said a quick prayer, and put on my innocent face. One of the cops came over to us. How long you guys been here? 2 hours, maybe 3 hours, Pedro said. Except for Mr. Lynch, he just got here. The cop took a glance at Mr. Lynch, and then he went over to Willie and started patting him down. Willie just stood there, and I hoped he didn't have anything on him illegal. Then the cop asked him how long he'd been here, and Willie told him that the same as Pedro did, except for Mr. Lynch. We'd all been there about 2 hours. Then I saw an officer pointing to one of the buildings, and when he did that, all the cops got around behind their cars and started crouching down as if they were expecting some heavy shooting. Hey, we're going to move on down the street, Tommy called out to the cops. You stay right where you are, the big cop called out, and like he meant it, too. And then the next thing we did was to look up at the building to see if we could spot any shooting. Now, I figured if there was a crazy dude up there shooting at people, he was liable to shoot us instead of whoever he was mad at. Hey, man, we're sitting ducks here on this rail, Willie said, and I'm sitting here on the end. You're lucky, I said. If it is some crazy fool, he's liable to be aiming at you and hit one of us. At least, if he hits you first, it'll give us a chance to duck. Hey, Mr. Officer, Pedro called out. We gotta get away from here before we get shot up. The cop looked over at us and didn't say anything. I bet if he had his way, he would have had us sitting out there in that police car. Some more cop cars came, and before you turned around, there was about 7 cars and a whole mess of people milling around 145th Street, trying to figure out what was going on. And the kids started coming around, and everybody was looking up at the windows where the cops were looking. One thing about 145th Street, half the guys on the block don't have jobs, and so they're always on the stoops or just standing around with nothing to do. And after a while, that gets boring. And so when the cops arrive like this, it just breaks the day up nice. Unless it's you they're looking for, of course. Please pause and answer questions 3 and 4.
Junior,
Old Mrs. Davis came running out of the laundromat with her fat self. Junior! Junior! Get back there! Things were getting out of hand, and the police tried to get people to move across the street. One of them got on the bullhorn and told all the kids to get off the street immediately. He must have meant that the kids didn't have anything to do, so they weren't going anyplace. So you just have these kids just standing there looking at the cops. And then even Miss Davis moaning and groaning on about where Junior was. Junior is a wino who does little odd jobs around the block, but anytime any trouble goes down, his mama starts running around screaming for him like he's 4 or 5 years old. There's somebody up there, the kid yelled. Now what did he say that out for? Everybody hit the ground, including me, and covered up the best they could. I hadn't seen anything, but I wasn't looking too hard. The thing I don't want to be is a witness. Once I got on the ground, I figured I was going to stay on the ground until the mess was over with. And then I saw Willie sliding on his belly down the way and into the Ease on In, the little soul food place. I went right behind him, and soon we're all on the floor of the restaurant. What's going on, Mammy? The girl who worked there asked, when all the guys came crawling into the restaurant. The cops are looking for somebody, I said. You better get on down here on the floor next to me so I can protect you. Flood, the manager, was eating a sandwich, and he just slid down to the floor and kept on eating. Right then a policeman came in and told everyone to get down. He was crouching, and the rest of us were down on the floor on our bellies, and he was telling us to get down. What's going on out there? Mammy asked. We got a report of a man with an automatic weapon, the cop said. Anybody here know anything about it? Please pause. Answer questions 4 and 5. Well, we all said no, and the cop eased out. What they mean about some automatic weapon? Pedro asked. It means when it hits your butt, you're automatically dead, Mammy said, and she got a good laugh out of that. That laugh that Mammy got lasted about a good 10 seconds, when all of a sudden we heard another one of them big-eyed kids saying something about seeing somebody at a window. We stuck our heads up a little so we could see what was going on. One of the cops started running around the front of the car and slipped on some dog do. When he hit the ground, his gun went off and a shot came through the window of the restaurant. There was glass all over the floor, and Willie let out a scream. By this time, the cops were shooting away that window. They must have had shot maybe 100 shots, and people was running and screaming. One cop went down behind a car, and when Mammy looked, she said he was bleeding. They got him in the head, she called out. The mess was getting serious. Willie was bleeding right next to me. Now the cop was shot in the head. I slid over to the counter and started to get behind it. We don't allow anyone behind the counter, Flood said. You know that? Outside, the shooting started again, and I squinched under the counter the best I could. Mammy got down next to me and put my arm around her, and she snuggled up. After a while, the shooting stopped, and I heard somebody say, They got that guy with the automatic weapon. It was some Arab. We waited for a while and then started getting up from the floor. I stayed behind the counter in case it broke out again. Then we all kind of edged around outside to see what we could see. I looked around. No cops had been shot, but the guy who slipped in the dog do was having his elbow looked at. We heard somebody shout and everyone hit the ground again, but then we saw that it was just Mary Brown. Mary is one of those smart sisters who has a good job downtown. She pointed up to the window that the cops had shot out. You shot up my new drapes, and I don't work all day for you fools to be up here shooting up my drapes. Who lives in that apartment with you? This cop with some gold braid on his hat said. Nobody, Mary said. Where's your boyfriend? The cop asked. I don't know where he is, Mary said, but wherever he is, he's not messing up my new drapes. If he's up there, they just killed him, somebody said. Let's go, lady, the cop said. Then they went to take Mary by the arm. She snatched it away from him and said she wasn't going anywhere with them unless she had a black man with her. She started looking around for somebody to go with her, and the cop grabbed me by the arm and said, You could come with us. Pause. Please answer questions 6 and 7. Hey, why do I gotta go? I asked. I don't know anything, and I don't want to see no dead people. Didn't do me a bit of good because they made me go up there with them. My knees were shaking. I had to pee so bad I didn't know what to do. Mary was going up the stairs like she was in a hurry to get someplace. The cops made us go up first and they came behind. I tried to turn around, but they gave me a push in the small of my back, but I saw they had their guns out. They were looking more tense with every step. They had one cop who was a brother, but he was trailing behind, looked like he was fixin' to run at any minute. When we got to the floor where Mary lived, I held my breath and closed my eyes. If I was gonna die, I sure didn't want to see it coming. Please continue the rest of the story on your own and answer the questions that follow.